Good day, everyone. So, we are the group 4, and our topics are first, we have research environment, second, research instrument, third, data gathering procedures, fourth, statistical treatment, fifth, definition of terms, and lastly, we have identify the hindrances encountered in research. Research environment is underpinned by a culture of integrity and based on a good governance, best practices, and support for the development of researchers. Research environment is also describes the area done when conducting a research. In choosing research environment, you have to be considerate for the convenience, data considered environment, that can benefit the researcher without further concerns. So, to make the discussion short, research environment is the place or the area where you are going to conduct your research. And if you are conducting your research or making a research paper, you have to overthink or brainstorm first before you decide what possible areas or place you are going to conduct your research environment. And also, when you are going to choose research environment, you should make sure that your research environment or the where you are going to conduct your research is accessible siya, dili siya delikado, duol ra siya, and then the place is very convenient for you or for us nga mag-conduct sa atong research. So I have here two examples of research environment.
Research instrument. The research instrument is usually determined by researcher and tied to study methodology. These are instruments that are used to collect data from participants of the study. A research instrument is a tool used to collect, measure, and analyze data related to your research interest. They are important for collecting data in all types of research methods. They are mainly used to research to collect reliable data which will later be analyzed. They include questionnaires, interviews, observations, focus group discussion, and experiment. Questionnaire. The questionnaire is commonly used instrument for collecting research data from the participants of the study. It basically seeks the opinion of individuals in a sample or a population on issues directly related to the objectives of the study. Interview, a measurement instrument otherwise known as oral questionnaire. It involves a process where a researcher solicits information from respondents through verbal interaction. A researcher would have previously prepared a scheduled list of structured questions pertinent to the study before meeting respondents for their opinions on the subject matter. Observation. This is instrument that is employed by a researcher which an individual behavior or situation is observed and recorded. There are two types of observation: participant observation and non-participant observation. In participant observation, the researcher is a member of the group to be observed, while non-participants observation, on the other hand, the researcher is not a member of the group to be observed. Focus group discussion. This data collection instrument refers to a process whereby researchers obtain data from large group of people at the same time. Focus group discussion method is very popular when carrying out research in the field of behavioral science, library and information science, archival science, records and information technology. However, in focus group discussion, a researcher identifies key informants that may be contacted to elicit the deserved information on the variables of interest in a study. Experiment. This type of data collection instrument takes place in pure applied science research. Here, the researcher carry out some experiment in the laboratory setting in order to test some reaction that may take place in the object of research. The advantage of this method is that it produces immediate result. Its results are viable and error-free if it is well carried out under normal condition circumstances.
So let's now tackle about what is data gathering procedure. So when we say data gathering procedure or collection of data, it is the process of gathering and measuring information on variables of interest in an established systematic fashion that enables one to answer stated research question, test hypotheses, and evaluate outcomes. So in short, it's a ways on how we gather data. So there are so many ways on how we can gather data. So these are the most common. So first, questionnaires, surveys, checklist, interview, observation, focus group, and case studies. So based on my research and also my experience, here are the steps in gathering data procedure. So first, ask permission. So this is a form of a letter asking for permission or approval to be submitted to the head, like principal or dean, for us researchers to formally conduct our study. Because if we just conduct study without asking permission, there's a huge consequences. Step 2, validation of questionnaires. So, reminder, before distribute your questionnaires, it must be validated by research experts or your teacher itself if it's reliable and effective. Um, Step 3, distribution of questionnaires. Step 4, orientation of the respondents. So if it's needed, then step 5, collection of questionnaire. Then we can now proceed to data tabulation, interpretation. So here uh, is an example of a data gathering procedure. So ani nga section kaning data gathering procedure is ani nyo taas-taas ni siya kay ani nyo tanan i-list kung unsay mga steps nga inyong gibuhat. Like for example, kinsa inyong gipasahan sa inyong permission para makakandak mo sa inyong study. Kinsa inyong mga selected respondents, kinsa pila ka respondents ninyo, bis anay tabo ang inyong study. So taas-taas ni siya kay ani man gud ninyo i-narrate tanan gipang buhat ninyo. So atong basahon sa ilang steps nga gibuhat. So ang kinunang steps nila is a letter of a request to conduct the study was prepared. So mao na to siya. Ang first step, ask permission para formally conducted na ninyo inyong research. Sunod, the researcher constructed a questionnaire checklist. So mao na siya. Then validated by professor. So ipavalidate niyo yung mga questionnaire if effective na siya and reliable. So mo to siya. Then na list what the researcher conducts the research in Teresa Rizal. So mo to siya mga steps kung giunsa ninyo or unsa ang inyong gibuhat sa inyong study.
Statistical treatment. Statistical treatment is a catch-all term which means to apply any statistical method to your data. Statistical treatment has two types. First is the descriptive statistic, which means summarize your data as a graph or summary statistic. In descriptive statistic, we are going to use the mean, the measure of variability, which is the standard deviation, the variance and the range, and also the frequency, the count. The second is inferential statistic, which make prediction and test hypotheses about your data. When we use inferential statistic in solving or treating the data, we use the parametric test, which are the t-test, the Pearson's correlation, and the ANOVA. We use them for us to solve the significant difference and the relationship of the particular data that we have. In the descriptive statistic, we have this what we call the measure of central tendency. Usually, mao ni ang pinakagigamit nila in solving or treating data or findings of the research. So we have the mean, the arithmetic average of the distribution. Median, use the middle value that separates the higher value and the lower value equally. And the mode, the most frequently occurring value. Usually, ang mga gigamit sa mga usual na research kay ang mean because they want to get the average of a specific data. Then, for the measures of variability, we have the standard deviation, measure of dispersion around the mean, variance, the square of the standard deviation, and the range, the difference between maximum value and minimum value. In measures of variability, ang pinaka-usual nga gigamit nila is standard deviation, kaya diri nila makita ang mga scores around the mean. For the t-test, this allows the comparison of the mean of two groups. If you are comparing two groups, you will use t-test. There are two types of t-test. First, independent sample t-test applies when there are two separate populations to compare. For example, I will get the past test result of the experimental group and compare it to the post-test result of the controlled group. So, duha variable ang gigamit ako in a separate population. Kung tanawon ako if naba sila significant difference or wala, ang gamiton ako kay independent sample t-test. Second is paired sample t-test, appropriate when there are two measures to be compared for a single population. In paired sample t-test, you only use one population or single population, but you compare two measures. In independent t-test, you compare two measures in a separate population. T-test and ANOVA are used to compare, meaning to say we are looking for significant difference, but correlation is different. It allows an examination of the relationship between variables.
At this moment, we are going to talk about the definition of terms. Definition of terms is a compilation of the meaning of technical words or terms, jargons, and even acronym that we are going to use in our research. There are two types of definition of terms, the conceptual and operational. Conceptual is you are going to define the terms and variable from a source. It could be dictionary or Wikipedia or anything that can be a basis in giving meaning of the terms and variable that you are going to use in your research. In operational, you are going to define the variable or terms based on your study. In other words, we're not going to use any dictionary or other things that I've mentioned earlier in giving meaning and definition of the terms that we are going to use. In this research, we are required to use the operational. At this moment, we're going to talk about what are the things or terms that needed to define in definition of terms. So what to define? The first thing is the identify terms in your title. If there are some very unfamiliar words from the reader, you can define it in definition of terms. For example, nagamit ko words na tukhang and na ay mo basa sa akong research na foreigner niya, wala siya kabaloon sa natukang. So, iyang pangitaon na lang sa definition of terms. So, ang tukhang kay war of drugs di ay. Second is we have identify the variable in your research. This variable can be found in conceptual framework. Next is identify treatments and measurement. This treatment and measurement can be found in data and data analysis terms. If there's some very unfamiliar terms na yung gamit diha dapita, you can define it or ibutang nimo sa definition of terms. Lastly is identify technical words. If nagamit mo very unfamiliar words na dili kayo familiar sa mga readers, mga terms, you can put it in definition of terms. So I have here an example of a format or unsay forma sa isa ka definition of terms. Behind of my back is an example of definition of terms I made last day based on my understanding and research. So at this moment, we're going to talk about how to write definition of terms. There are a lot of ways in writing definition of terms, but I just take down the important part in writing definition of terms. The first thing that you are going to do is write a short introductory statement. This briefly states the context of definition of terms. So I write some example. For better understanding of this study, the following terms are defined in the context of this research. Next is write the words of terms technical you would like to include. If feeling ni mo na yung mga lisod na terms na um, pili mo ang mga readers kay di kasabot, then write down here in the definition of terms. So example here is I write ecotourism, heritage tourism, sustainable tourism, and tourism, which is relatable ra kaayo sa atong kurso. So I define them based on conceptual because I base it in the internet. But in writing our definition of terms, we have to be operational. Operational means based in our study, based on how we use the terms in our study. Second is, as you can see, I wrote the definition of terms in alphabetical, and that is mandatory. Then next is the term should be intended. Dapat tupong ang first intention sa introductory statement o ang first terms na imong i-define. Lastly is the term should be end immediately with a period. For example, ecotourism and the national period, and that's how you define the definition of terms in definition of terms in research. With or without the underline, it is acceptable basta naara siya'y tuldok. So, that's it. I hope you learned something, and please leave a question or any clarification in the comment box. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. I am Lenny Balo, and I'm going to discuss the hindrances encountered in research, or the problem encountered by researchers. First, what is research problem? A research problem is an issue or concern that an investigator present and justify in a research study. A problem that someone would like to research. The problem faced by researcher, which is the time and money. Time and money. Time and money is one of the biggest problems that a researcher faces during the research. We know that time is money. If we lose our time, then we're losing the money. During our research, researchers have to waste their time for collecting the information from the various sources. And here is the hindrances encountered in research or the researchers. The first is the lack of a scientific training in the methodology of research. The second, insufficient interaction between the university research departments on one side and business establishment, government departments, and research institution on the other side. And third is the lack of confidence of business units on researchers. The fourth, overlapping research studies. And the fifth, lack of code of conduct for researchers. And the sixth, difficulty of adequate and timely secretarial assistance. The seventh, unsatisfactory library management. 8. Difficulty in availability of data and data quality. And the last is the problem of conceptualization.